I will share kind of my perspectives as a private investigator in my years in working with individuals and family law firms and forensic accountants and anyone involved in the process, kind of like my view. It is a small group, so I encourage you guys to stop me at any time and ask any questions or ask any specific scenarios. I'm happy to share examples and tangible things. On the legal side, I'll share my perspective as it relates to best practices and what I've seen. Judges and courts throughout California and across the country vary in how they handle things, and there's very much nuances. So obviously, consulting with a good family law attorney is always super important. So some concerns, we'll kind of go over the basic concerns that we see, and I'm sure you guys see as well, but these are the top things that we as private investigators see in the space. And then we're going to look at kind of how can a PI really help? What are some tools? What are some things we can do? Does it make sense to talk to somebody? And how does that kind of differ between the DIY approach, hiring an investigator, or relying on your attorney to do the work? So we'll look at that, and then we'll look at some cool tools, and then left some time at the end for some Q&A so we can talk about specific examples and cases and kind of go in deep and answer those specific things that come to mind as you guys are listening, or as situations that you, your friends, your family, your clients are dealing with. That makes sense. We'll get it going. So first off, a little bit about me. So licensed private investigator within the state of California, which doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, but have a license allows me to work with individuals and businesses and law firms. I'm certified private investigator, so I have an additional certification. I've testified and done work as an expert witness in a lot of civil cases involving family law, employment law. I've written articles. I do a lot of stuff online, a lot of training to try and further the profession. My goal is to kind of elevate the private investigator profession because it's kind of viewed as a non-professional, non-legitimate enterprise in a way, in many regards, and people often think of things on television. So that's kind of been my goal. So this is kind of my bio and kind of my credentials. I've been, again, 20 plus years, over 30,000 investigations. Most of the work that we do is litigation tested. We have a team in our office, myself, and then my internal team that does a lot of our desktop and internal research. And then we also have a team of field investigators that do a lot of our field stuff. So it's kind of our shop is set up in a way to kind of be able to react and deploy on a variety of different cases and variety of areas. And we cover all of California and the US for that matter. What we typically see in these situations is the first thing that happens is the financial uncertainty, right? What is it that the client doesn't know about? Is it the hidden and undisclosed assets? That could be bank accounts, brokerage accounts, pension accounts. It could be real estate, right? They're concerned because they don't know what they don't know, right? And they may not be able to get access to that information in real time. And so they're unsure about that process. And so then they meet with an attorney, and the attorney may walk them through the steps and what that looks like. That's definitely a concern, right? I think the other part is safety, right? Their safety of themselves and their children, depending on the situation. There could be a situation where there could be violence in the home, or there could be other issues that they're worried about. Where are my children going to go? How are they going to be? Who's going to be around them? Who's going to be taking care of them? And we'll talk about some things that we do in those situations to kind of help with that. And it's just general protection of mind and body, and that's typically something that comes up. And then, like Kimberly had mentioned, right, the legal process is complicated, it's expensive, it's unknown. Maybe they haven't gone through it before. They don't have an advisor or somebody helping them through the process. So they're kind of concerned about what does this look like? How long is it going to take? What can I do? What can I do? Is my lack of understanding of the system and the knowledge of what's going on in the business of the family, is that going to be an issue? And so we often consult in a lot of these different areas because they often touch the investigative world. The number, down the road, once people get into it, they're worried about how do I uncover this information? How do I develop information that hasn't been disclosed, right? Trying to get their arms around all the information financially and otherwise to help them make a good decision about what to do with the divorce. And how do you go about that? What's possible? What's not possible? How much does it cost? How is that going to factor into the divorce? Both financially, for their house, for their kids, and ongoing, and in the rest of their life, right? Our goal is kind of help them get peace of mind, right? That's kind of the number one thing when clients come to us that, similarly with a lot of you guys, right? How do we ease that peace of mind, right? So we give them a clear view of the process. We try to give them sense of the tools and the resources that are available. We try to, again, like I said, uncover everything that's possible within the resources and parameters that are available to help them make a good decision. So as an example, if we're fighting over like a $10,000 vehicle, we're probably not going to advise to do $20,000 worth of investigative work to do that, right? Some people will fight like that, and we've seen that happen in the past, but that's not a good idea, right? But recently, for instance, we had an example of a client who was going through a divorce, and a their husband is involved in a cash business, not the marijuana business, but the discrepancy between what they believe his income is through the business and what has been presented was around $500,000, right? In that situation, it may make sense to deploy some resources to uncover or at least press a little bit further, because that's going to be something that's more impactful to the overall divorce, right? So then it may make sense to come up with a plan. And our goal is to come up with a plan that makes sense. It's kind of fixed cost, understanding the time and the cost that are involved to actually conduct the investigation and what the potential outcomes are, right? There's no guarantees in investigative work, but hey, there are some outcomes that can happen. And at least, again, we're getting back to the peace of mind. Do we do everything possible to uncover what's out there to make a good decision? The results of it, being, we can't control those things. We can just control the activities that we do to actually go through that process. And I think that's super, super important in these situations.
Can I jump in, Tim? I love that you said that, because even if you don't uncover mystery theoretical accounts or businesses, that client knows that they checked. Otherwise, that what if is lingering in the back of their mind. That'll drive them insane.
Right. And also too, sometimes the law firms and lawyers will often not be comfortable giving advice about what's possible and what's not possible from an investigative perspective because for ethical reasons, right? And maybe they don't know. Right. So it helps to get an investigator involved as kind of was it Michael? I don't know if he's still there, but in a consulting capacity. So as someone that can give advice to the client and their attorney on what makes the most sense, instead of spending time and resources doing surveillance and asset check or a background. Hey, maybe just walking through the process and saying, do we think we have everything we have? Is this subpoena that was been generated? Is this going to be going to reveal the information we need from a bank or from an employer or whatever else, and kind of strategizing in that way. That way, I think the client and the attorneys also feel like they're everyone's working in the same direction, and we're spending the right time and the right resources on the right things, and not just going kind of willy-nilly through this and trying to, crazily develop information and figure things out, and it becomes this kind of hectic mess. The other issue that comes up is security, right? We talk about security of their house, their kids, their dogs, their assets, all that kind of stuff. So trying to give them tools and access to information to do that, right? And we think of security as like, guns and things, but oftentimes it's people just feeling secure in their own house now that their ex is gone, or being secure in their house with their kids, or secure when the kids are with mom or dad and they're not visible. And so there's some different things that happen in that regard. So that's kind of our goal. Those are the kind of things that we see and what we try to deal with. I'm sure it's similar in a lot of respects in the professions that you guys are in. So we're going to talk about that kind of from an investigative perspective. All right. So the first thing that I always say, and I'll provide this to you guys, is that anyone going through a separation or divorce should have like this technology separation checklist. Because typically what we get is, hey, is my house bugged? Is my car bugged? Am I being tracked? Is someone reading my emails? It comes up all the time in heated divorce separation situations, right? And nobody, again, this goes back to the security piece. Nobody wants to feel like they're being tracked, they're watched, they're listened to. And so they watch a lot of television. They're at a time when their senses are very heightened, and they're thinking that, oh my gosh, these coincidental things that are happening, it's tied to technology or a bug or some tracking device, and they're very, very concerned, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that, and that's kind of the first step before we go into kind of a full-blown bug sweep or counter surveillance or anything like that, to keep them protected and feeling again like they're secure in their day-to-day life as they talk to, email, text, and just kind of engage with society, right? And so we have a two-step process, which we advise is the checklist, the 7 things you need to do. And what that really involves is just moving the person, the husband or the wife, away from all those accounts that are integrated together. So Find My iPhone, if they're on the same AT&T account, separating those out. Getting their Wi-Fi at their house secured, security systems, camera systems, any technology that allows a third party to access their whereabouts, their activities, what they're saying, what they're doing in a remote fashion that doesn't involve a bug that you would see on TV, a tracking device, a listening device, a GPS device. Going through that process and separating everything out, right? Anytime we log in to different accounts, financial or otherwise, other people are getting notified for security reasons, right? But that becomes a tracking mechanism so that people see, others can see what they're doing, right? When my wife logs into the Amazon account, I might get a security alert. If she, the Ring camera. I mean, you think about all the things, the Internet of Things that are going on that are integrated and give people a sense of, in essence, a tracking footprint of what you're doing, right? We just don't even realize it because in normal everyday life, we've kind of become and a lot of people have it's become acceptable, right? That we do these things and we give up our privacy for convenience or for security that we deem to be, necessary. So I'm happy to share that with you or your clients, but it's a pretty easy process. And what we do is we walk them through that process. So we say, okay, look, let's set up a 15-minute or 30-minute call, and we walk them through and help them do that. And if it's things they can't do on their own, we can help them with it. Or we advise them to get their attorney involved and get permission to do that. Hey, I need permission to get on the AT&T account so I can get removed, right? I don't have access, but I need to have access. Or, hey, our Range Rover has a GPS, but the GPS account's in the husband or the wife's name. Give me access to that so I can remove it, so that the tracking information doesn't go to the ex, right? As a couple of different examples. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And we get these calls quite often in family law situations. And again, then if that doesn't work, then we can move to a sweep where we can sweep for bugs on the cards, tracking devices, things like that. Something to keep in mind though, right? A lot of times in these heated situations, people have this idea that, well, if I can prove that Kathy put this tracker on my car, she's going to go to jail. Well, yeah, it is a criminal offense. However, remember that when people are married, if vehicles are co-owned and houses are co-owned, the rights to privacy have been kind of removed. And it's very difficult for me to prove that Kimberly or one of her agents put this on my car. Right? People that use tracking devices don't register them with their real names, nor they're like, there's not things on them that allow you to track them back to an individual. So just to keep that in mind, that's kind of our two-step process to kind of initially keep the people that are going through that separation protected, give them the peace of mind, let them to communicate freely with their friends, their family, their counsel, and to, avoid that feeling that, their ex is watching every move.
I have a question. Yeah, I have a question on that, Tim. So I know a gal who put a spy app on her ex-husband's computer, so she gets information on what he's doing on the computer. Mm-hmm. Is that illegal?
So there's a few things in play. It depends when she put it on. So if it was pre-divorce or pre-separation or post, who owns the computer and where the computer sits and like how she accessed to do it. So technically, if it's community property, there's really no issue in doing that because it's co-owned. But if, for instance, she broke into his house and put it on a computer after he moved into an apartment, that would be more of an issue because she doesn't own that property. But yeah, she could. But again, it's kind of a gray area when it's one spouse on the other. It's a lot more acceptable. If it was me doing it, it'd be a federal crime. Because you can't hire someone to do that, right? But when you have people that are doing it, it's very difficult to, do that. We have seen situations if that's uncovered though, then the courts will get involved and put in restraining orders, and it gives the other side more leverage if the husband finds out, right? It's logical to think that the only person that would have access to a computer, a family computer, password, whatever else, access to it would be the spouse or someone that the spouse controls. So in that respect, you got to be careful because there are some federal laws that are pretty serious about tracking and installing, spyware, malware, and tracking kind of keylogger, if you will, on electronic devices.
Would you find that in a sweep?
It's a great question. So in a sweep, you're not going to find that because you're looking for devices and other kind of cameras and things that are on the network. Another part of that is kind of an IT technology checklist, which we go through as well. So if you need to remove all the devices that are sitting on the network, and then you can also do analysis of all the different computers that are there. So if there's keylogger or that kind of stuff, that would be computer or device by device to actually check that.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Because you could do a bug sweep, and the bugs could come. There could be no cameras, no listening devices, no bugs. But yeah, if there's tracking stuff on a software on a computer or a cell phone or an iPhone, you're gonna the bug sweep is kind of useless, and that's why that checklist is super important to go through and remove those things before you do that, because you feel like you've protected yourself and you really haven't. So it's a key thing. All right, moving along. So we're gonna look at assets. That's the next thing. Kind of the biggest thing that comes up in divorce situations where we're working with clients is, where are the assets? Where'd they go? What don't I know? What am I concerned about? How much is out there? They kind of fall into several different categories, right? You could have business ownership, you could have property, you could have bank accounts, brokerage accounts. Business ownership's tricky. If any of the spouses are involved in business ownership or they're self-employed, it creates a much more difficult situation for the opposing party, because a lot of times people are moving assets, they're controlling the P&L and the financial statements of that company, and they're moving up and down their income and how they're being paid, and they're manipulating those numbers, right? However, it's super important to understand all the business entities or ownership that an individual has before making a final decision about the divorce. So what we do is try to develop LLCs and other corporations and business entities that either could hold assets or real estate or anything else for that matter, so that you have the full picture. But business ownership being number one. Property, most people are aware of the property that they own or don't own. However, if it's owned in an LLC or if their ex is part of a small group, sometimes they're not aware of it. And just to dig into that and to look to see back, like, did he start selling this property off in preparation for the divorce? What was owned and when? Sometimes the dates are super important, so you kind of track back and figure out what went on. And then, of course, bank accounts and brokerage and equity accounts. Those are very, the bank accounts is the biggest thing, right? So the ex provides information about bank accounts that are known, and the spouse is like, there's no way this is true. There's something he's not providing. And then they come to an investigator and say, okay, look, let's research and dig a little bit deeper. When it comes to bank and brokerage accounts, there's not 100% search tool that is out there to search every bank and every brokerage house in the whole United States. It just doesn't exist. So you're casting a net to develop as much information as possible to uncover what you don't know. And part of that is including into that search those accounts, both bank and brokerage, that you are already aware of. So the investigator you're working with is not giving you information you already have, right? From there, then the attorneys need to get involved and subpoena those banks to get more detailed information on the transactions, the wires, the deposits, the balances. Investigators are not going to give you all that information. We don't get that information anymore. You used to be able to get tons and tons of detailed information, just can't get it anymore. So that the subpoena will be required. But the good news is that you can subpoena any and all accounts at B of A under Kimberly Social, and you'll get all of them. You don't need me to tell you which ones they are. You don't need to say, these are the accounts I want information on. So that's kind of how that works. And there's a variety of solutions, anywhere from, say, you figure around $900 to $2,000. You can probably get most of your bank and brokerage account searches conducted, just as kind of a base point, so you have a sense of what's available. So this is probably the reason I hit this first, is because this is probably the most heated item of discussion in most of the divorce situations that we deal with. And these are the top 4 things that are of concern. Typically, the bank accounts is number 1. Another thing that we do quite often is surveillance, and most people think of as private investigators doing infidelity surveillance. However, in most situations involving kind of a heated divorce, and California is a no-fault divorce state, right? So meaning no matter if you can prove that someone was cheating or not, really doesn't play into the court's decision on how they're going to divide assets and do different things like that. However, surveillance can be useful in things involved, situations where there are custody disputes. There may be abuse or alcoholism or substance abuse. Visitation monitoring, cohabitation, employment information. Again, this kind of goes back to where are my kids going, who's going to be there, and what has the court said is acceptable, right? So when dad has the kids, grandma must be there. Well, if grandma's not there, they're in violation of the court order, so we might do surveillance to show that. Or it's a monitored visitation at the park, and the monitor has been agreed to as grandma, as a bad example, but we'll go to the park, is grandma really there? Dad had a DUI, he shouldn't be driving. So when he has the kids, he's not supposed to be driving them. So his sister, mother, aunt, whatever should be driving. And we go out and we get him driving the kids in the vehicle without a license, right? Those are more actionable situations that speak to the court getting involved and giving the client more control or limiting visitation and protecting the children in a situation that's unsafe. And again, this can also impact the custody order that's issued at the end, because we all know that if it's 50-50, then one side's it's split, right? If it's 80-20, that impacts the support that's being paid by one party or the other.
Can I jump in there, Tim? I
Sure.
know that from my experience that whenever we would say something to our attorney for the divorce, he would say, well, where's your proof? Every single time. And we just had nothing. And so something that this nature would be the proof.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just spinning the wheels and I'm paying to complain to my attorney.
Right. And that's the thing is, so remember that the burden is kind of on the party that wants to move the action, is to provide the proof, and then the other person would have to disprove it. So unfortunately, that puts the person kind of usually with the less resources and less control, having to spend more time and more money to develop this information. However, it could go a long way in, in the divorce. But yeah, you've got to have proof. So as an example, cohabitation, right? So although California is a no-fault divorce state, if you can prove that your ex has been cohabiting or using community property assets to furnish a place, an apartment, a condo, a house for a boyfriend or girlfriend, that is significant. But you have to prove that, right? You can't just make that allegation or claim. So you need some sort of surveillance evidence. You need some sort of document showing there's a lease. You need to show that person was there, or you got to, you could subpoena them for a deposition or whatever else. But you have to prove that. Down the road, when we talk about people that are trying to get modifications of support orders, same thing. Well, either surveillance, we could do spot checks early morning, late at night to document vehicles present. We do it all the time. Hey, boyfriend is living there, or mom is living with boyfriend, and we got the car there 5 nights in a row. Okay, that's sufficient enough in most situations to go into the court and say, look, there's sharing of assets there because they're living together, which means that my support should go down, and bring that to the judge and let them do that. Then the other side has to refute it. It's very difficult, right? You've spent the time and the resources and got that court, but you're not going to go into court until you have that evidence. You're not going to file that motion to get before the judge until you have it, right? The other part that comes up that people sometimes don't think about is employment, right? So in these situations, if the person is lying about their employment or diminishing what they make, it can definitely impact the divorce, right? So they're tanking, right, during the divorce to show that the amount of money they're making is less than it was before, decreasing support. So surveillance can be useful to develop new employment if you can't do it through other investigative resources to, again, show that they're either lying, which impacts credibility, but two, to show that, hey, look, where can we subpoena records for wages to show that they're actually making $150,000 plus commissions doing sales at, a software company, as an example. So when people think about surveillance, those are kind of the typical one is infidelity, but I just point out the other things in our world that we use surveillance for to help in kind of these transitionary situations involving kind of separation and divorce. And these things happen at any period. It could be pre-filing, it could be after filing, or it could be after even a dissolution has been in effect for a few years. A lot of people, when they're coming to retirement age, they know they're going to be making less money. So they'll come to us and to their attorney and say, look, I'm going into retirement. I'm making less money. I know that my wife now is married, or my ex-wife is married and has a job. I want to show that so I can go in and get that order modified before I go into retirement, right? Speaking to the background check part of it, a lot of times that we're involved to develop information on different people, and Kimberly made reference to that earlier. Oftentimes, again, it speaks to the security, right? We've got a new boyfriend, a new husband, a new wife, new girlfriend, new nanny. Who are these people? Who are they? Who's going to be interacting with your children? What are they all about? Again, the more information that you can develop on your own to show evidence to the court about the credibility of one party or the other gives leverage in that situation. And some people, again, just want the peace of mind to know that the new girlfriend is not a drug dealer, prostitute, convicted felon, because little Johnny is going to be with them, every other weekend. But those are a couple examples of when investigators can get involved, and that can be done discreetly, confidentially, develop that information. And then if there's something that comes up, it can be used down the road to support kind of a more of a legal action to kind of modify support or who can be around the children based on that. So. Does that make sense?
I love this because we did this on every boyfriend and new husband that mom had. Nothing showed up, and that's all we cared about. We just wanted to make sure that the kids weren't with, some convict. I don't even know, or drug something. And so when they came back clean, we were relieved and we had peace of mind, and we were able to not think about it anymore. So for us, it was a huge peace of mind.
And at a minimum level, if you think about it, a lot of times clients are wanting to develop criminal information to go after the other side, which can be useful, but most of the time we're aware of whether our spouse has been involved with the law enforcement contact or whatever. But run a driving record for anyone that's driving the kids around, right? If they don't have a license, they shouldn't be driving the kids. It's really about the security and safety. It's not necessarily about the leverage. The other part of it, I guess, from people don't think about a lot is evidence collection, or we call them trash runs. So we do these oftentimes in situations where we want to prove substance abuse. So we go early morning, late night, grab trash on the day that the trash is coming, assuming it's a single family house with dedicated trash and it's possible. We've got needles, narcotics, handles of vodka, you name it, come out of the trash. Super impactful in situations where we're trying to show evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to a court that the person who has custody of the kids is violating the order. I can't drink 24 hours or 48 hours before visitation, or I'm not going to drink, or whatever the court may have ordered in a given case. Really, really useful and pretty cost-effective way to get some pretty good lifestyle information. And also cohabitation, right? If we need to find cohabitation and we have a utility bill in the trash in the name of someone, that may help us to prove that in fact cohabitation is happening, right? So again, great stuffs to be found in the trash. Pretty easy to do, and it's amazing what people throw away. And again, just general lifestyle information. Sometimes there could be information there about assets, banks, whatever else. I always say we've kind of transitioned from kind of a physical environment to a digital environment. But back in the day, right, anyone that controlled the mail, bank statements, brokerage account statements, whoever controlled the mail knew what was going on. If you didn't get the mail, you wouldn't know. So oftentimes the stuff in the trash is coming from the mail. It gives us indication of where they may be banking, what they may be doing. But going back to the beginning, as you look at the separation part of it, usually the first question that I ask a client is, well, where's your mail go? And they'll say, well, I don't, usually the party we're talking to doesn't get the mail, right? That's why they're coming to us, because they're trying to understand what's happening in the family. And from a financial perspective, it's difficult to uncover. So why hire a PI versus DIY, right? There's a lot of resources out there. There's tools, there's databases, there's anyone can Google something and figure something out. So why not just do it yourself, right? So obviously we talked about it. It's obviously discreet and confidential. Any inquiries with the PI, whether they're retained or not, are to remain confidential. And in a trusted licensed PI is going to do this discreetly. So it's not going to trigger the spouse or ex-spouse or the parties involved that this is happening, right? It should be done very much, under the radar and confidentially. And then the evidence that can be used, people don't think about it, but down the road, if you really get this really good piece of information, but you as the spouse did it, you can't testify in your own case. You can't file a declaration. You can't go to a judge and say, well, I found this. It needs to be an uninterested third party that provides that information to a court. Otherwise, the evidence is kind of tainted and not admissible, for a technical word. And also, too, most PIs are very experienced working with attorneys in these cases and understand what they're looking for. So they're able to work with them, provide the reports they need. The reports are drafted to the attorney to keep them privileged and confidential, which means that the other side can't get access to the information, even in situations where they may want it. And because if I work directly with Kimberly, but she's not retained by counsel, if somebody does it like a subpoenas her records or say turn over everything, she may be required to turn over my report because there's not that attorney-client privilege that's involved. So that's something important to think about. Also, the resources and techniques. Well, again, there's a lot of great tools out there. There's many tools and resources that investigators have access to and know how to use that are a lot better than what the average consumer is. Obviously, there's a lot of good armchair investigators out there, but the resources aren't quite as great, and how it's being done too. So as an example, right, a lot of people go on social media and create fake profiles as an example and friending people to get access to information is really a violation that should not be done. But a lot of people do it to get information. That's a no-no, right? Investigators not going to do that. They're going to understand how to do it in an ethical and professional way to make sure the information that is obtained and the money spent is useful. Getting here close to the end, but it's just, again, we talked about it. There's some cool stuff that we can do. Obviously, direct access to the DMV, getting the driving record, figuring out what people are up to, what they've been doing, what vehicles they've been driving, that kind of stuff. Hey, why does dad have a new Ferrari? Who owns it? That kind of stuff, like full access, both driving records, vehicle ownership. It can be important to know in these situations. Most consumers are not going to have access to that. Computer and cell phone forensics, we talked about a little bit earlier when it comes to the bugging of computers and cell phones. The data on cell phones is tremendous, and in family law situations, there's a ton of data there, so it could be extracting text messages to support evidence of a conversation. I'm sure in Kathy's world, when they're doing counseling, right, knowing what people said and when and how that all those conversations. Now, unfortunately, that's all done through texting or apps that are on our phone, not always through a conversation. So seeing that, and then also just there could be malware, spyware, or whatever else that's on phones and computers. One thing to keep in mind, a lot of times people are buying cell phones post-separation for their kids and then using them as tracking devices. So I'll put a cell phone in Johnny's backpack. Oh, I bought this little iPhone for him, even though he's 9. But I turn on the GPS, and so then I know where Johnny's going, which means I know where Johnny's mom or dad is going. and then it's used that way. Like, oh, I want to be able to reach Johnny whenever I can. But think about it. That's really a tracking and communication tool to let that happen. So again, there's some nuances of how that can be dealt with. But again, if it's done after the fact and one party bought it, it makes it difficult for the other side to get access to it, image it, whatever else. But there's some really great technology out there software-wise to pull in all this data and then from computers and cell phones and then present it. I think it's most important in the financial space when you're trying to uncover information about the finances. Remember, the emails and the files that are on someone's computer really tell the story. We have Quicken, QuickBooks, we have all these different software tools, search history, browser history, tells you right where to go. So the computer is way more important than the mail. It's like the mail used to be. Now the computer houses that. The challenge is getting access to it and extracting the data off of it that would be useful in kind of uncovering the pieces of information that might be missing. So super, super important to know, to kind of inventory, keep control of, and look for like disappearing computers. If there's like the family computer that disappears, that's indicative in my world that there's something on it that's valuable that they don't want to turn over or provide. So a lot of times, to be quite honest, not to poo-poo on family law attorneys, a lot of family law attorneys are not familiar with computer and cell phone forensic procedures, and they won't necessarily invest the time and resources to do it, but sometimes it's the best and most rich area for information and evidence. And again, there's a kind of another search report that investigators have access to called vehicle sighting. So if we want to know where someone frequents, say a bar, a location, or we're trying to figure out where they moved to, a lot of times the X has moved to a location, we can't find them, but we can run a plate or a VIN and figure out off of traffic cameras where they've been most frequently. So for employment, for residence history, if they're frequenting bars or other establishments that they shouldn't be, really great tool for that. This is kind of, we talk about what it can do, but this is kind of an example of a real life example, right? So you can see you're not getting the picture of the people in the car. So people call and say, well, can I do a vehicle sightings report and see if my husband has a woman in the car? No, it's not like that. It's not a traffic cam like for writing a ticket. It's just the plate and the location and the timestamp of where they were. So that's kind of how that works. And it's, again, there's always these tools within an investigator's toolbox to help develop information and evidence in these cases. There's not one size fits all. There's always kind of a creative approach based on the circumstances, where the person lives, the situation involving the separation or the divorce, and kind of what they're trying to uncover, and the budget, right? So there's always different solutions that are out there that can work to at least attempt to develop the information or kind of give the client the peace of mind they're looking for. So I talked a lot, so I will stop and open it up for questions. There's my contact information if anybody needs it, but I'm happy to open it up in roundtable. I know that small group, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you.
Great presentation, Tim. Really informative. Really well done. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
What about offshore accounts?
That's another one that comes up from time to time. So offshore accounts. There is the ability to search for offshore accounts. My suggestion would be to look at and get any and all information of the accounts that are known stateside, and then look to see if there's transfers or large movement to other accounts by looking at those that you have, right? Because if they move the money offshore, they have to do it somehow, some way, right? So the challenge is, let's say I find $1 million in an offshore account, okay? The US courts do not have jurisdiction over the Caymans, and they don't have jurisdiction over these things. So the legal process to get accessing to those things is a little bit more complex and more resource intensive. On a whim, right? So we can do searches for offshores and we look at the typical locations, but I think it's more and more rare. I think people have this idea that everyone's doing that, and that's where the money is. You have to have pretty good evidence and information to suggest that that's where it's going in order to do that, and make sure that you're checking with the attorney to know what the practical guidance is on how to get access to that, like the Bitcoin or the crypto situation, right? If I find $1 million in there, what does that mean, and how does that play into the strategy of the divorce, and how can it be recovered? Is it become a taxable event? Does it open us up to an IRS audit, right? You got to think about all these things that go into that, and people don't often think about that.
How'd you get into this field?
That's a good question. I get that a lot. So it's a family-run investigation business. I started back in 2001 when we were, my dad was in the process of purchasing an intellectual property and brand protection investigation company. I kind of worked in the business. And kind of self-taught and did a lot of work to learn the business, and really got kind of passionate about the legal nuances of and the evidence and everything that we do in the legal process. And from doing the work and hands-on to kind of going through and learning it all to running the business, it's kind of become a situation where all the different pieces that go into investigative research and public records research and all that kind of stuff, something I'm pretty passionate about. So it's kind of a natural fit. And now I have the opportunity to kind of run the business, which is kind of the entrepreneurial part of what I like to do. So that's kind of how I got my start. And so I've kind of learned from my dad and the other people in the business, and then I just kind of took it over. So no law enforcement experience, no background in that area of it, but I know quite a bit about the legal side of things. So that helps to really speak the language of the clients, which are typically insurance companies, law firms, brand owners, and business folks.
Thank you. Great history.
Yeah.
It's fantastic to have someone we know to reach out to, because now that we've seen this presentation, we'll notice it more come up, and we'll say, oh, it would be nice for us to reach out to, have a contact named Tim. Let's reach out to him and see what he has to say. So I think it's helpful.
Yeah, and to that point, we encourage people to reach out, or I do anyway. Set up a time to talk, spend 15, 20 minutes, talk about things, what the strategy is. A lot of times I tell people do not hire an investigator. It's not worthwhile, right? But at least have the conversation to know what's possible, what's probable, and what the resources involved would look like, so they can make that decision. Again, in the separation world, it's very, very, there's a lot of emotional stuff going on. There's a lot of stressors. And so just for them to have that conversation. So the best thing is to have a conversation with the investigator, the client, and then whoever else it is. If it's a financial person, if it's a mediator, if it's an attorney, financial planner, whoever it is, usually one of those people in that situation has the closest link to the client. And then it feels like they're bringing in resources to help them. And then they can make a decision on their own and feel like they're the ones driving it, as opposed to telling them, hey, you should do this, do this, do this, do this. And they just feel like they're being kind of tossed around. So yeah, it's definitely, and again, totally confidential if you're going to licensed private investigator. And also make sure any of your clients talk about this. Kimberly brought it up. All investigators should do a conflict check to make sure that they have not represented or work with the other party or the other party's businesses, because obviously that would be a big no-no. But investigators should not work both sides of a divorce case, right? Obviously, but something to keep in mind. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Nice meeting all of you.